I closed the tab without a sound. No reaction, no follow-up. Just one slow breath as I looked at the number in front of me. It said everything, 0. My name is Arden Vale. I am 38 years old. I work as a senior client strategist at Halden Core, a technology company based in Seattle. My role is not the kind people clap for, but when things fall apart, I am usually the one they call to fix them. 3 weeks ago, I closed a deal worth $5 million. The client was a Canadian energy company, cautious, demanding, and tired of delays. The original team let it stall. I picked it up when it was already broken. I rebuilt it from the ground up. That meant flying in when no one else wanted to. Sitting through meetings no one could explain, translating between legal teams and operations. At one point, I stood in a frozen construction yard with their site supervisor just to answer one line in a contract face-to-face. On Wednesday morning, they signed. On Friday afternoon, my name disappeared. The internal system that tracks ownership no longer listed me. The deal was now credited to legal and procurement, 2 departments that had not touched a single part of the negotiation. At the very bottom of the revision, reviewed by Miles Trevors. Miles had been promoted just 8 weeks earlier, head of business growth. He spoke in big phrases and clean slides. He liked the word alignment. He liked decisions that moved quickly. He was not on any of the calls, but he had full access to decide who would be visible when the dust settled. That afternoon, he passed my desk. "Quick heads up," he said while tapping his coffee cup. "We're adjusting how bonus credit is shared across functions, just part of a bigger shift in how we recognize contribution." He smiled. He did not stop walking. I sat still. Then I opened the drawer beneath my desk. I pulled out a notebook, not for feelings, for facts. I wrote down the time, the words he used, the version number on the contract file. Because when they try to remove you, they do not announce it. They do it through updates, through language, through silence. 10 minutes later, Lucy walked by. She used to assist the sales team. Her role was eliminated during the last restructure. She looked at my screen, then at me. She gave a small nod. That was all. When this happens the first time, it feels like an error. The second time, you wonder if it is just office politics. By the third, you start preparing for it. There is a rhythm to this kind of removal. First they reorganize, then they simplify, then they forget. Not by accident, but by design. But forgetting only works when no one else remembers. If you are still listening, maybe on your commute, maybe standing outside a building you once built from the inside, say where you are. Because if this feels familiar, you will want to hear what happened when the chief executive officer asked one question. Who closed that deal? I stayed in my seat, not to hold on, but to see how far they would go pretending I had never been there. The following Monday, I was not included in the weekly forecast review. That meeting was part of my calendar for 7 years. I had helped write its original format. But now the invitation was missing. No message, no explanation, just absence. At 10 o'clock, I passed by the glass conference room where the team had gathered. The slide on the screen showed 5 active client accounts. The second one was the Alberta contract. The numbers were mine, but my name was not. Miles stood near the front. One hand rested on the table, the other pointed at a projection. He was speaking smoothly. Just enough confidence, just enough distance from the details. I could see the phrasing on the screen. It mirrored parts of the deal summary I had written, but the style was slightly different, shorter, glossier. Later that day, a colleague forwarded me the new reporting slide. He said he thought I might want a copy, just to stay in the loop. The slide listed ownership for each deal. For Alberta, it showed Lead M. Trevors. No mention of me. I archived the file, then I opened my own version of the report, kept offline, stored separately. I updated it with the latest timeline the client had approved. That evening, I received a call from their project coordinator. She asked for clarification on a change in the rollout. She said she had not been able to get a clear answer internally. I walked her through it step by step. There was no tension, no complaint. She sounded like someone who simply wanted the real answer from the person who actually knew it. That same night, I moved 3 folders out of the shared drive. They contained contract drafts, email summaries, and internal notes that connected to the next stage of the deal. I backed them up in a private space where only I had access. Nothing was deleted, but nothing was left exposed either. The next morning, Miles announced a new process to centralize communication. He assigned a junior analyst to review all external correspondence. The message sounded efficient, streamlined, but I had already made my adjustments. Lucy saw the change too. She stopped by on her break and asked if I had seen the announcement. I nodded. She waited a moment, then said, "Funny how things only need to be centralized when they're already slipping." She walked away before I could answer. Not because she expected anything, because she already knew the answer. By the end of the week, Miles had reshuffled 2 more projects under his name. The public folders showed him as lead, but when updates were needed, messages kept finding their way to me. I made no corrections, I gave no reminders. The structure he was building looked fine from the outside, but inside, something had already come loose. The shared folder for the Alberta deal had a new name. I saw the change early Tuesday morning. The title had been shortened. My initials had been removed. The ownership tag now pointed to a team inbox instead of a person. I opened the folder. Inside, the main documents were still there, but the versions were older. The contact log was missing its last 2 entries. The rollout brief had been copied, renamed, and stripped of my formatting. The only record that still linked to me was buried in the metadata. I made no edits. I downloaded everything. Then I moved it to a separate archive under my own control. Nothing had been taken from me directly, but the shift was clear. They were not replacing the deal. They were rewriting the chain of custody. That afternoon, Miles sent out an internal update. He introduced a new reporting tool for strategic accounts. It was bright, well-designed, and simple. The update said the new system would help streamline contributions and ensure visibility at all levels. But the form did not include a space for historical context, no place to trace decisions, no section for conversations already resolved. I saved a copy of the new template, but I did not use it. Instead, I opened my notebook and started a new page. I logged the folder rename, the missing contacts, the template launch, the time it was announced, and who responded. Lucy passed by again. She paused when she saw my screen. I turned it slightly. She said nothing, but I saw her eyes move across the page, line by line, then back to mine. She gave a single nod, quiet like before. That evening, I moved several client-related message threads to a private folder. I removed shared access to a few planning documents and marked certain links as view-only. I did not block anyone. I just stopped inviting people who had stopped acknowledging the work. The next day, I received an email from a client-side engineer asking for clarification on a technical detail. The message had originally been sent to Miles, but it had been forwarded to me with a short note. "They said you'd know." I replied with the answer and added the relevant file. Miles never followed up. He mentioned nothing, but later that week, he added a sentence to his team update. "Arden assisted with technical confirmation." That sentence told me more than he intended. He had started depending on work he could no longer trace. By the time the structure looked stable on the surface, the original logic had already been moved somewhere else. Quietly, step by step. Not long after I adjusted the internal permissions, the client sent over a small request. They wanted to move the rollout window by 10 days, just a minor shift, but they did not send the message to the team inbox. They sent it directly to me. No copy to anyone else, no note of explanation, just trust. I made the change, logged the update in my archive, and returned to my desk. The change never passed through the shared dashboard. That same week, Miles presented his usual update to leadership. I was not in the room, but I had access to the slides. He spoke confidently, repeating the same version of the schedule. Untouched, unchanged, still reflecting the original timeline. Lucy brought me a hard copy of the deck later that day. She had circled one box in red ink, the date that no longer matched. "They are still presenting the version that's already expired," she said. I nodded. No response was needed. We both understood what was happening. Later, the client followed up. They had received a forwarded copy of Miles's slide and wanted to be sure it reflected the latest agreement. Their tone was careful. I sent back the real document. Clean, labeled, correct. That evening, I went back into the shared folders. I adjusted access one layer at a time. Documents were switched to view only. Dashboards were detached from real-time sync. Links expired and stayed expired. Nothing was deleted. Nothing needed to be explained. Miles continued sending reports. His tone had not changed, but the materials had. One day later, I saw my wording appear in his files. Exact phrasing, even the footnotes. He had copied the timeline directly from my version. At the end of that report, he added a new line. Schedule confirmed in coordination with Arden Vale. He was beginning to lean on the version he could not control. By the end of the week, 3 different team members came to me privately. Each asked for a file that no longer existed in the shared space. Each one referenced a version they remembered, but could not find anymore. I gave them what they needed. No questions. Just the right version, sent directly. Lucy passed my desk again. She paused, held up a printed email, and raised an eyebrow. "Someone just asked me for a slide I know they deleted last month," she said. "You think they know yet?" "They don't," I replied, because the version they thought they were working with had already become a shell. The real system had moved, quietly, consistently, into the hands of the only person who still understood, where every piece fit. Miles still appeared in the meetings. He still carried the title, but beneath him, the structure had changed. He was presenting a system that no longer worked without me behind it. That week, the client requested a review call. They wanted to check on 3 specific items: compliance tracking, resource allocation, and the first delivery checkpoint. The request was clear. They asked for me by name, not the department, not the team. Miles joined the call, opened with his usual introduction, and began presenting the update. He spoke smoothly, listing progress points and next steps. He used polished slides, echoed words from earlier meetings, and filled the space with a kind of calm certainty. But behind the polish, the timeline on the screen was already out of date. The client listened, then one of their leads asked a direct question. "Has the updated compliance form been submitted? The version from last Friday?" Miles adjusted his posture. He looked down briefly, scanned his notes, and gave a general reply. He said the schedule was still under internal review. He said things were being finalized. His voice remained steady, but his answer lacked the detail they were expecting. The client lead paused, then turned toward me. "We were told this item had already been closed with you." I responded with a quiet nod. "Yes, the revised version was submitted last Thursday. I can resend it now if needed." There was no tension in the response, no shift in tone, but the meeting changed after that. The rest of the call moved quickly. The client took control of the agenda. Miles contributed where he could, but he did not speak with the same confidence. When the call ended, the client sent a short note of thanks, to me. After that, Miles updated his project deck. The numbers were now aligned with mine. The compliance section used my language. He adjusted 3 blocks and added a sentence at the end of the summary, finalized in coordination with A. Vale. That phrase marked a shift, not a handoff, not a correction, just quiet reliance. In the following days, 2 more clients reached out. Their messages were polite but specific. Each of them had been confused by internal reports. Each had heard a different timeline than the one they remembered approving. Both asked to clarify things through me. I gave them what they needed, nothing more. Later, Lucy dropped off a folder. Inside were printouts from 2 meetings I had not attended. My name appeared in both transcripts, not as a participant, as a point of reference. She looked at me, half amused. "They're building their updates around your answers," she said, "even when you're not in the room." That evening, I reviewed the internal project tracker. Side by side, 2 versions of the same system were now in use. One looked clean and public. The other lived in notes, in inboxes, in quiet confirmations. The space between them kept widening. Not long after those calls, a new conversation started, quietly but from higher up. The chief executive officer reached out to the client for a routine quarterly check-in. It was meant to be a short exchange, just a thank you and a question about long-term alignment. But the client brought up something else. They asked if I would remain involved through the next phase of delivery. They used my name clearly. They did not refer to a department. They did not ask about structure. They asked if I would stay. That question made its way back to the executive office, not through Miles, through the chief executive officer's assistant, who forwarded me an internal note. Would like to understand Arden's current scope of involvement. There was no alarm in the message, no urgency, just a quiet prompt to clarify what had already become visible from the outside. I prepared a document, not a defense, not a pitch, just a summary. It included my communication log, client responses, implementation timelines, and a delivery outline showing what had been completed and what was still in progress. No edits, no framing, just records. After I sent it, I was invited to a short meeting. The assistant said it would take no more than 15 minutes. In the room, the chief executive officer held a copy of the Alberta contract summary. It was the real one, the version with my name on the margin and all the internal tags still visible. He asked only one question. "Did you build this?" I answered with a simple yes. He nodded once, then said, "Thank you." That was all. No explanation was needed. The evidence spoke on its own. The client had already confirmed what the internal system had tried to bury. After the meeting, I returned to my desk. I noticed that my name had been re-added to several shared files, not manually, automatically, as if someone had adjusted the permissions to restore visibility. The folders were the same, but the ownership line now included me again. Miles did not say anything, but in his next team summary, he used a different tone. Fewer declarations, more observations. At the end of the update, one new sentence appeared. Final approval pending with Arden. It was not a gesture. It was not respect. It was survival. Others began to notice the shift. A product manager who had not spoken to me in weeks asked if I could review a technical detail. A finance analyst asked to confirm a discount clause from a document I had written 6 months earlier. A delivery lead sent me a message that read, "I think your version is the one we should anchor on." No one said it directly, but everyone had started choosing which version of the system they trusted, and that version had my fingerprint on every layer. Lucy dropped off a folder at the end of the day. Inside was a list of upcoming client audits. She had highlighted 3 and left a note. "They're asking who should lead these reviews. I said they'll find out soon enough." The printed pages rustled slightly as I opened them. Nothing about them had changed, except the order. Now my name was on top. The language inside the company began to shift. Meetings that used to start with updates now opened with questions. Small ones, at first, about status, alignment, delivery assumptions. But the tone was different. The people asking no longer sounded like they were seeking answers. They sounded like they were verifying what they had already heard elsewhere. Miles kept presenting. He still wore the same suit, used the same slide templates, and walked into the room 5 minutes early. His reports were clean, his voice steady, but the content was beginning to unravel. In one meeting, a product lead pointed out a mismatch between the rollout schedule and the financial forecast. Miles paused for a second longer than usual before responding. He explained that there had been a delay in synchronization between systems. The room stayed silent. A few people began writing things down, not the content, just the moment. Later that day, I received a quiet knock at my door. A manager from client operations stood there with a printed dashboard. She placed it on my desk and said, "These numbers do not match what we showed last week." I reviewed the document. 2 fields had been copied incorrectly from a version that was no longer active. The source files had not changed. The path had. I fixed the fields, exported a clean version, and handed it back. She thanked me and left without another word. The next morning, Lucy forwarded me a message she was copied on. It came from one of the directors. The subject line read, "Which version of the Alberta rollout is final?" Lucy had not answered, but she highlighted one line in the thread and added her own note. "They know." Miles continued sending updates, but the formatting changed. His charts became simpler, his bullet points shorter. He stopped including forward-looking projections. Each report moved closer to the exact language I had used the week before. In one internal summary, he added a short paragraph. "In close alignment with Arden's ongoing timeline and delivery records." No one commented on it, No one challenged it, but the shift was visible. People stopped correcting each other in meetings. They just turned and looked for confirmation. And when they needed that confirmation, they turned to me. By the end of that week, 5 people had requested access to my versions of key documents. Not through official systems, not in front of others, just short messages. Director. I shared what they needed, clean and quiet. The structure that Miles had tried to manage still stood, but the foundation was no longer holding. He could speak, but the material he referenced came from somewhere else. He started arriving earlier to meetings, staying later, asking for clarifications on items he used to explain himself. His tone never cracked, but his tempo changed. The more he spoke, the more space others gave me. That space did not come from fear. It came from clarity. They had all seen which version continued to move forward, and they had all begun to step away from the one standing still. There was no meeting, no decision memo, nothing official, but the pattern became obvious. A partner asked for the updated service schedule. Instead of forwarding it to Miles like before, they looped me in directly and addressed the question to my name. The request arrived quietly. No explanation attached, just direction. I sent the file, along with the supporting documents. Later that afternoon, a summary of that exchange showed up in the shared channel. The message came from someone in operations. The note included the words, "Confirmed with Arden," followed by a link that now opened from my folder. No one corrected it. No one asked why the path had changed. By the middle of the week, internal teams began referencing my version of the implementation plan by default. Not because they had been told to, because it worked. Because the updates were consistent, because the timelines aligned. Miles continued to send his reports. He included all the usual fields. He spoke during the weekly sync, but more often, people looked down at the screen instead of up at him. They followed the numbers, but not the voice. Lucy noticed first. She placed a folder on my desk and tapped the cover once. "He's using your structure now," she said. Inside was the latest summary Miles had sent. The outline matched mine exactly. Same table layout, same phrasing, same color codes. The only difference was the sender. That evening, I received a message from a client-side coordinator. They asked whether a policy note could be signed off before Friday. There was no question about who should review it. There was no copy to Miles. I signed it, sent the note, and logged the action as usual. The next morning, a director forwarded the approval to the executive group with one sentence attached. "Cleared through Arden." The system adjusted itself, not from force, from use. People kept their titles. The dashboard links stayed the same. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The chain of response now pointed to where the answers lived, not where someone wanted them to appear. In the following leadership brief, Miles spoke for less time. His slides were shorter. He mentioned delivery updates but deferred to others. At one point, he paused mid-sentence and said, "Arden can probably speak to that." No one looked surprised. No one shifted in their seat. After the meeting, he walked past me in the hallway. No eye contact, no message. Lucy stood nearby. She waited until he was gone, then said quietly, "He just asked me if you had access to the final forecast." I told him you wrote it. We both left it there. By the end of the week, I received a request from the finance team to walk them through a series of adjustments tied to the Alberta timeline. The file they sent had already been renamed. In the top right corner, where it used to say Final Review, Miles Trevors, now it said Final Reference, Arden Vale. The offer came in quietly. A short message from the Chief Operating Officer. Simple language, no attachments, no build-up. "Would you be open to a title change that reflects your current scope?" I read it twice, then left it unopened for the rest of the day. The role they described later was clean and centered. A director-level title, no drama, no backfill discussion, just a line of acknowledgement created after weeks of watching how the system had reformed itself. But I never asked for the title, and I had never left the work. When the deal first moved forward, I had stayed in place, not to wait, not to earn, but to hold the structure that others had assumed would stay solid without guidance. And now, that same structure was still running under my name without formal naming. I did not accept the new role. I did not decline it either. I simply kept working, meetings continued, deliverables moved forward, clients reached out directly and got what they needed. Internally, no one brought up the change. Not because it did not matter, but because the function had already shifted. The formal title no longer carried the center of gravity. Lucy passed by my desk with a printout. It showed the current stakeholder map for all active clients. She pointed at the name listed next to Alberta and said, "This version was approved by legal. It's going in the audit folder." I looked at the line. Account owner, A. Vale. She smiled. They tried to split it 6 ways last quarter. Now no one's even asking. Across the floor, Miles still held meetings. His badge still carried the same role, but his updates now required validation before being submitted. His charts used fields that I maintained. His projections included references to timelines that he no longer touched. Nothing had been taken from him directly, but nothing routed through him anymore. In the hallway, one of the newer analysts caught up with me between meetings. She asked if I could review a risk note on the Western expansion. Then, more hesitantly, she asked, "Were you always the one behind the Alberta project?" I said yes, nothing more. She nodded, made a note in her folder, and walked away. The office around me had not changed, but the people inside it moved differently now. No one used phrases like "brought her back" or gave her credit. They did not need to. They asked me what to do next and waited for the response, because the system had recentered itself, not around titles, but around whoever still knew how to hold the entire map without losing the lines. I kept the folder closed until the project was finished. It held the original terms, the compliance updates, the revised rollout sheets, every change I had written, tracked, delivered. The folder was not formal. No one had asked for it, but it was the most accurate version of what had happened. When the Alberta project closed, the client sent a handwritten note to the executive team. They thanked the company, but they addressed the message to me. "Thank you for leading through every step. We trusted the timeline because we trusted the person behind it." No one replied publicly, but the message was posted on the internal board, and no one touched the formatting. After that, I handed the folder to the audit team and moved on to the next account. Not a promotion, not a pivot, just the next delivery. A week later, someone asked if I would take on a visibility role for a new vertical. I declined. I offered to train someone else instead. The role would still get filled, but the core would stay in place. The system I left behind had already outgrown its titles. Miles kept his office. His name stayed on the reports, but the questions no longer flowed through him. When answers were needed, they followed the line of context, and context always pointed backward until it reached something I had built. One morning, I walked into a strategy session. A junior team member was presenting an onboarding structure for a new client. They called it the Alberta Framework. I asked if that was the official name. They said yes. Legal had included it in the internal glossary last quarter. I let that sit. A few days later, a small mistake caused a delay in another department. Not critical, just a few days off schedule, but the people who noticed it came to my desk. "Do you still have access to the early escalation flow?" they asked. I did not answer right away. I checked the system. The documents had been moved. My permissions had expired. I was no longer part of the official chain. I looked back at them. "You'll have to check the new version," I said. "I'm not in it anymore." They hesitated, then they left without a word. That evening, I packed the black notebook I had kept since the day they tried to erase me. I left it in the drawer, not hidden, just waiting, in case someone needed to remember where things had started. The next week, a new issue appeared. Same platform, different client. A number did not reconcile across 2 dashboards. The team spent 3 days trying to trace the change, and when someone finally found the right version of the file, my initials were still there, in the audit trail. Not because I had stayed, but because no one had ever replaced the foundation.